And it's my great pleasure to introduce Beth Lay, our first of these speakers. Beth's been an inspiration for me and throughout a number of organisations, through Siemens, her time at Calpine, and most recently for the last 2 years as the Director of Safety and Human Performance at Lewis Tree. Now, if you're not quite sure what Lewis Tree is, it's a bunch of people doing the most dangerous job that you can do in the United States. And she's been there for 2 years implementing these ideas that we've been speaking about and putting human performance into action. So Beth, thank you so much. I know it's late for you and probably cold in Rochester, New York right now, but thank you for taking the time to speak to our audience at the ForgeWorks Safety Innovation Summit.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this. I appreciate it. And it is cold here. I have all the heaters and the fire going here on Lake Ontario in northern New York. As Dave said, I've been with Lewis Tree for a little over 2 years now. And I want to start out with a story of how my journey at Lewis Tree began. So it was the Friday before I started work, and it was actually Labor Day weekend, September 2 years ago. And I got a call from my boss, and he said, "I've got bad news for you." And, after moving from Houston to New York and starting a new job, that's the last thing you want to hear the day before, the Friday before you start work. And it turned out that a young man named Ivan had been killed the day before in an ordinary backyard in working on an ordinary tree in Ohio. And so my first job at Lewis Tree was to help investigate that fatality. And I will tell you that when I accepted the role, I was naive. I'd worked in the energy industry my whole life, but I really didn't know that much about line clearance. And as Dave said, it is actually one of the most dangerous jobs in the United States. And so there was no path for us to follow. We had to blaze new trails, and the trail hasn't been straight or it hasn't been easy to blaze. One of the things that I want to share with you, I want to start out by maybe sharing with you a little bit about the background of the company and the work that we do. The leadership at Lewis Tree actually came up from the ground. So the CEO and the COO have actually done the work. They started out as groundspeople. And a lot of the leaders in our company have done the work. So they know and they understand work is done, which I think is a huge advantage for us. The work itself, if you can imagine this, you're either in a tree or in a bucket of a bucket truck, and you're using a chainsaw, 2 hands on the saw, and you're cutting the tree away from the power line. So 2 hands on a saw, balanced or tied in somewhat precariously in a tree, working near a power line that most of the time is live. So that gives you some idea of how dangerous the work is. The other work that we do is if there's a hurricane or a bad storm, which we've had a lot of recently, we also are the company that comes in to clear the trees off the power lines, off the down power lines. So you can imagine this power line under extreme tension with the tree laying on it. And we're the ones that come in to clear the trees. So with that work, one of the things that we learned early on is that when things go bad, they go bad really quick. I mean, you need to have your response planned before you even go in. You need to have your escape path planned before you even start the cut. The other thing that we learned, and we've been working with researchers from Ohio State, part of Dave Wood's lab, researcher Asher Bach. Oops, sorry, getting a little bit of feedback here. So the researchers, the safety researchers at Ohio State, one of the things that they noted right away is that our work is among the most variable work of any work that they've ever seen. And they compared us only to second to the special forces. So it turned out that this is the perfect place for us to implement safety differently, not only from the standpoint of the work that we do, but also from the standpoint of the leaders that we have in place. So I want to share with you today some of the things that we're doing, some of the things that are working. And my hope is that you'll be able to take some of these ideas away and that they'll help you implement safety differently. So one of the things that we're doing, and I often call the leaders of our company the best question askers that I know. On Monday mornings and then on Tuesday mornings, we actually do incident reviews. And then this morning, for example, we did a close call review. And during those reviews, the leaders which are our CEO and our COO and myself, the questions that they ask to try to understand what happened with those incidents and close calls are really incredible. And with that, I want to give you a couple of examples. And also I want to offer to you the questions. So reach out to me later if you're interested in getting the questions. And I will tell you that these are questions that our CEO and COO have come up with over time, and they're truly incredible. So the questions explore trade-offs. So for example, one time we had an issue with the truck, and the question they ask is, what pressures will you face if you take that truck out of service? They often demonstrate caring and empathy. They'll ask, what was that like when you first got called? How did that impact you? And are you okay? Our CEO loves this question. What are the 3 or 4 things that you do every day to create safety? Our COO loves this question. What problem was the worker trying to solve? And we always ask, what did the worker say? What was the voice of the worker? And this is one of my favorite ones. How many times have you successfully removed trees this past year? And the answer to that question, this was a group that did trouble trees, about 2,000. And then we thanked them. Thank you for that. Thank you for those 2,000 trees. Support noticing risk. What was the biggest difference that day from a normal work site? The questions probe a system view. So I could go on and on, but I think as I go through this presentation, one of the things that you're going to notice is that the questions are fundamental. The questions are fundamental to leading in this different way. One other thing that we're doing is, and this is something that Deidre mentioned, is we're mining close calls. Now, so there's 2 things here. One is reporting close calls. Great, that's fantastic, and that's important, and that's key for us. But the other part is proactively going out and mining close calls. So what does mining close calls look like? Mining close calls looks like having conversations with workers saying, hey, what story do you always share with a new guy? It also might include probing the extremes, such as, what was the worst experience you had when you responded to storm? What was the scariest thing that happened? So instead of waiting for these serious close calls to happen, we're going out and reminding those stories ahead of time, which leads me into another thing that we're doing that's been extremely powerful. So storytelling. Probably a year and a half ago, I went to a local storytelling event in Rochester, and I stayed afterward to speak to the MC. Well, it turns out the MC was a storytelling coach who even knew there was such a thing as a storytelling coach. So he began to support us, and he actually is a reporter for our local newspaper and also a journalism instructor. So we brought him on board to help coach the safety team in how to interview after an event, and then how to write a really good story. So when we interview after we have an incident, we interview to understand what happened to the person. And so it's about people. And we also interview to understand the details that are going to make this story memorable. Then we use that story and we write a case style study story. And you probably can't see this very well, but it starts out with setting up the job. You know, you kind of you set the scene, you kind of say, okay, you lay out, this is kind of what was happening that day. Then you ask questions like, what about this situation might make a problem more likely? Were there any early warning signs? And what do you think happened next? Then you lay out, well, this is how it turned out. This was the event. And then you ask questions like, have you experienced situations in the past? How have you handled it? If you were in a similar situation, when would you have pressed pause? So, and then we share lessons. Storytelling has been really key to us in multiple ways. One thing is it creates organizational empathy, and it also creates collective memory. So storytelling has been extremely important for us. Another thing that we do that's been really effective. Okay, think about our folks. Their office is either a truck, or when we meet in the morning before we go to work, we're usually in a parking lot. So we're standing in a parking lot in all kinds of weather conditions. These are folks that love working with their hands. They love being outdoors. And so the way they learn best is through action. Roughly a year and a half ago, Asher Balkin, safety researcher that I work with, and I were having a conversation with this gentleman named Ty Wood. And Ty Wood was an emergency medical service, an EMS, and then he moved into the software development area. One of the lessons that he shared with us that he brought from being an EMS into software development was the importance of drills. And they actually call it game day in software development. So we took that and we made Wednesday our drill day. So Wednesday's drill day. Okay, you think of drills, you probably think of responding to some emergency situation, and that's a very valid drill. But the drills we do are different. The drills we do are for multiple purposes. And I'll give you one example. So one that we did recently was a drill to help folks realize and to be able to judge their distance between where they are in the bucket and the power line. You have a minimum approach distance of 3 feet. You're supposed to always stay 3 feet from this live power line. Well, that sounds easy, right? But then you bring the human factors into it and the perspective of where the spotter's standing. So this drill was all around looking at the bucket compared to the power line, or actually compared in this case to a pole, from different perspectives to be able to judge the distance, and also noticing that when you say stop, how quickly can you stop? So the drills are very applicable to our most serious injury potential risks, and they're also hands-on, and they bring in human factors and they bring in current safety science. So that's a lot. A couple more things I want to share with you. One is after action reviews. And if you're not doing after action reviews, it's probably one of the most important things you can do. Early in our change journey, we began doing after action reviews. And I will tell you that that has been the most instrumental thing that we've done in changing culture. And it changed culture. And in fact, one of the workers said this to me, and I'm like, that's it. It changed us from being a safety organization that tells people what to do to a safety organization that creates opportunities to think and stimulates thinking, and through the questions that we're asking. So the after action reviews have been really key for us. Same questions that you probably are all familiar with. What happened? What did you expect to happen? But here's a new one. And this is a new one that has been really important for us. And that is, how were you surprised? And that question is very carefully asked as an open-ended question. How were you surprised? The answers we get to that question are incredible. I mean, we're learning from that. We're learning about the shape of surprise so that we can begin to anticipate how we're surprised. For example, as I opened up, I said things happen really fast. So then we ask, what went well and why? What would you improve and how? And what did you learn that would help others? So note that we're probing what went well. Something always went well. So we're probing safety too. We're probing work that went well. We do after action reviews sometimes for jobs that went really well. We're noticing a trend in our close calls and after action reviews. And in fact, about 20% of the close calls and after action reviews that were reported in Q1 had this kind of theme. We came up on this difficult situation and we paused and we replanned. And that replanning typically involved including another general foreman or reaching out to another crew member. You know, all the other speakers today have talked about the importance of diversity. And so that's one of the things that we are, that we're impressing, that we're emphasizing, and is the importance of, when we come on a difficult situation, pausing, asking for help, and then bringing in some fresh perspectives. And it's happening more and more and more. And I know that it's helping us prevent serious incidents. So one thing that I want to wrap up with, and this is, I'm going to go back to Todd Conklin here. So I was actually on my way to investigate a really serious event where a gentleman had been struck by the top of a tree. It had fallen and hit him. He was injured, but he was okay. And I was traveling to investigate that serious injury, and I was reading one of Todd's books on fatality prevention. And the book has a couple of statements in there that were really epiphanies for me. And the statements that were in there were about the fact that it's not the things that are high risk that kill or injure workers. It's the things where you have a lot of uncertainty. And when I saw that, or when I read that, I'm like, that's it. That's it. That's important for us, because from the beginning, I had been asking, what do we do that's high risk? Because I was trying to figure out, when do we need to trigger into that replanning a different action? And I kept getting this answer: everything that we do is high risk, which is true. And so when we start to look at it, when we start to reframe risk in terms of uncertainty, that's a whole different situation. And so we created this thing. It's simple. We call it an uncertainty gauge. On a scale of 1, it means that they're pretty certain about how they're going to be able to bring that tree or that limb down. So they feel like they have a lot of control over it, and they have a lot of certainty on how they're going to be able to bring it down. On the other end of the scale, on a 10, they're very uncertain, right? There might be dead wood overhead. The tree might be decayed. And if you're up on a 7, 8, 9, 10 on that uncertainty scale, that's when you need to pause and you need to escalate and elevate and bring in other perspectives for that replanning process. The uncertainty scale is really connecting with workers. It's working. They like it. They can connect with the idea of it. And thank you, Todd, for that idea. So I'm going to pause there and go back to you, Dave. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Beth. Thank you so much for your time. I've often thought that if you've got, with enough time and enough resources and enough information, you can manage safety. In fact, you can manage anything, but that's not the world we live in, and that's definitely not the world that the people in your organisations live with, is just knowing exactly what that tree is about to do when they hit it with that saw. So you really need to understand, I suppose, and obsess around the risk and the uncertainty of what's happening day to day. And what I really loved about what you said, Beth, is where you talked about questions and you gave those really specific examples of the questions that leaders like to ask. And I think what happens, what's always happened in the past is organisations is we've wanted safety professionals and managers to have the answers when workers raise questions. But if we really want to innovate safety, if we really want to think about how we're approaching safety in our organisation, is understanding that managers and safety professionals should only ever ask questions, and it's the workers who should give the answers. And if we can just make that paradigm shift, I think we're going to make a huge amount of progress in safety. And the things you talk about, mining close calls, after action reviews and drills. And Beth, we've spoken about this before, because when I started my career in safety more than 20 years ago, I was actually looking after a vegetation management crew that did the same job that your people do around electrified railway lines. And every single shift, what they would do is throughout the morning of their shift, one of the guys, when they were chopping down one of their trees, would put a Coke can somewhere in the fall zone of that tree. And the goal would be to try to make that tree, when they cut it, fall and crush the Coke can. And whoever got the furthest away that morning bought lunch for the whole crew. Now, this was this simulation and skill building practice. This is in the 1990s, happening in organisations. Have a reflection. All of you out there listening today, if that was going on in your organisation, would you celebrate and support and enable that and think of that as a fantastic way to build capability and capacity to manage the dynamic situations people face? Or would you see that as unnecessary and stop that from occurring? So I think that's a really important thing for us to think about is how we understand work as imagined, work as done, and building capability into our organisations. So thank you, Beth.